Are we nuts? Can we get the RTX 4090 to hit 120 frames a second with ray tracing enabled at a native 4K? Ray tracing is the future of graphics, at least according to Nvidia, so we're going to be setting some rather lofty performance goals and testing with a myriad of popular titles, not only 4K native 120Hz, but also DLSS of course, and also throwing in downscaling with DSR. There's a lot of stuff to go through here, and of course we're going to get into all of it after this message from the video's sponsor.
If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they have an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as Home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices. So let's further discuss both the goals themselves and how we'll attempt to achieve them using not only the raw horsepower of Nvidia's Lovelace architecture, but also various technologies which are available to us. The first goal is simple enough. How many games can the RTX 4090 hit an average of 120Hz with ray tracing at a native 4K and maximum settings? We're going for the average FPS here, rather than the minimum, given things like shaders stutter. Honestly, I suspect most folks with 4K screens capable of 120Hz will be running with VRR on anyway. The second goal is to further play with settings, reductions in ray tracing quality and their impact on performance and visuals, as well as showing you guys a few tricks with DSR and DLSS. For titles where 120Hz is easily achievable, we'll also be pushing for better visual quality, and in more demanding titles, how can we squeeze ourselves past the finish line? Also, it must be said, with the latest iterations of DLSS, the results have gotten really good, often close to native, although still not quite perfect in some titles. Personally, I'd recommend its usage when combined with ray tracing. This particularly becomes evident running high resolution and demanding games on non-Halo products, for example an RTX 3060 or a 2060 Super. DLSS and competing technologies such as FSR helps gamers with less than bleeding-edge Halo products push higher resolution and visual settings. And for those with the absolute best, they can crank out ridiculous frame rates at the highest graphics settings. We'll talk more about this stuff and scalability in a future video project though. I'm sure most of you know what DLSS and its ilk are at this point, but let's just have a quick refresher. Its usage is to upscale the game to your target resolution, with the input resolution essentially being quality. Some games refer to this as performance, quality, and so on, whereas other titles such as Control don't have names for the quality settings. Instead, they simply have the input resolution in a menu, and you can select it and it will work exactly the same way. So for example, the quality setting for 4K DLSS is 1440p. This translates to 66.6% input resolution with a 1.5 times scale factor. The full breakdown of the jiggery pokery of DLSS is outside the scope of this video to cover, but basically it relies on a combination of current and past frames of animation, known as temporal data, and AI, which uses this all as a combination to achieve their effect. There's also frame generation introduced in DLSS 3, and it's a specific feature of RTX 40 cards. Essentially, the GPU itself generates a frame of animation, largely taking the CPU out of the equation and instead relying on Nvidia's tensor cores. This increases frame rate, although it's not perfect, and some games, such as The Witcher 3, I would honestly recommend it. It really does help. We'll talk more about Witcher 3 in just a moment, actually. For our testing though, we will show you both native frame rates and DLSS 2 of course, but also combining DLSS with DSR, and essentially providing ourselves more flexibility with input and output resolutions. This allows us to have much greater control over quality settings. DSR, or Dynamic Super Resolution, can be found under Nvidia's control panel, Manage 3D Settings, DSR Factors. We can go from 1.2 times up to 4 times.
DSR unlocks high resolution options which your screen would not natively be capable of displaying. Owners of a 4K screen, for example, could go up to 2880p or even 8K. To be clear, super sampling is not a new technology, and in fact it's used in great effect for older games or even emulators. It's a great way to use up extra GPU performance for nicer looking visuals. Now, because we're afforded the ability to crank resolutions all the way up to 8K, we thus gain access to finer grain control for quality. For example, in Control, here, at 4K 2160p output resolution, we're allowed to have a selection of different input resolutions, with the highest quality visual one being 1440p. Again, this is equivalent of DLSS quality. With DSR, choosing 2880p for the output resolution, which is then of course downscaled on your GPU to a 4K output, we have access to input resolutions such as 1670p and 1920p. Taking 1920p as an example, it's a subtle reduction in GPU workload versus 2160p of a native 4K image. This, however, does still leave us with a bit more work the GPU must undergo. It basically has to reconstruct the image. With DLSS, this places the burden on the card's tensor cores, and basically reconstruction still takes a little bit of time in the graphics pipeline. We also have ray tracing quality. Games, of course, can implement ray tracing using a plethora of different strategies, all the way from full reflections to just something like shadows and lots of other effects in between. How good a title looks with ray tracing will vary on a game-to-game basis. In some games, honestly, you don't really notice the difference too much, and in others, it's quite transformative. We also, of course, therefore are given in some titles a lot of options to lower ray tracing quality, which can improve performance massively, sometimes at not much of a cost to visual quality. We'll look at a few specific examples later on to show some comparisons. We're almost there to the benchmarks, I promise, but we also need to get some discussions out of the way for both software and hardware and setup. All games are going to be running their latest patched versions, for example with Steam. With standard DLSS versions and no modded config files, there's no mods or anything like that. I've not gone in therefore and say manually updated newer DLSS versions, as I want to recreate a out-of-the-box experience as much as possible. Similarly, all control panel options for Nvidia are left to default with the exception of DSR, which we'll get to in a moment. I'm also using separate rigs to capture the footage rather than shadow play because it does have a small impact in performance. As for the rig, we're using an Intel 13900K, thanks to Intel for the sample. We're using a ROG Strix Z690 gaming DDR5 board, thanks to Asus. The cooler is a Deepcool 380mm AIO, thanks to Deepcool, review coming soon. And a 32GB of RAM from Corsair, thanks for them to giving us a sample, giving us lots of memory. The graphics card, well, as you probably guessed by now, it's an RTX 4090 made by Palette. It's a Game Rock edition, with clocks and everything left at their defaults. Thanks to, well, you guys actually for watching the videos and helping support us to get the card. So let's get back to DSR and the various factors as well as the methods, because there are two supported with GeForce cards. The first is Legacy and the second is DLSR. There are a number of factors, and these basically mean higher numbers unlock higher resolutions. Speaking generally for a moment, it doesn't hurt to have all of these ticked. Side note, they may not appear if you're running a laptop with a built-in display. They don't with my laptop from Acer, for example. As for the different modes, DL attempts to be more efficient and also improves quality. I ran some benchmarks in a couple of games, including Control, which you can now see on screen using both methods. For me anyway, there wasn't too much of a difference in performance with my RTX 4090. I'll be doing more testing on this in the future, but I decided to stick with Legacy for the majority of our testing here because I wanted consistency with different resolutions, and well, I thought that was a better option. I've also not included Witcher 3 results, simply because there was a big update just as I was finishing up this video, and because I'm working on other projects I just did not have time to do meaningful retesting. I'd already had to do that with Dead Space. Potentially I'll do some type of follow-up here, but honestly, Witcher 3 is just very demanding, and so I suspect that we would see similar results to say Cyberpunk, where anything short of lower settings and DLSS, ideally with frame generation, you just won't be able to crank out 120 FPS anyway. Witcher 3 is very demanding, very taxing, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it evolves over the next several months with various patches and updates. Now, without further ado, let's blast over the benchmarks, and we'll discuss some standout results. So, it's pretty obvious some games are extremely easy to run with ray tracing due to their implementation or game engine optimization. Resident Evil Village, Doom Eternal, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and a couple of other examples honestly run without a hitch. DLSS simply is not needed with an RTX 4090. Indeed, technically, we even hit 60-ish FPS average on Resident Evil Village at 8K. Now, consider the number of pixels here. There's no upsampling. Honestly, I think it's kind of nuts. But things got much more interesting with titles like Metro Exodus Remastered. This is much more taxing, and we can see at 4K native with max RT and ray tracing reflections, with just over 80 FPS. Nudging the quality down for RT and using hybrid gets us well past our targets, and we skate the target at 2366p output resolution with DLSS quality and high RT and reflections. Control, meanwhile, well, it was a bit weird. It's one of those titles which really did show us what ray tracing can do. The game features a lot of ray tracing controls, or, if you prefer, some presets. The lower ones bring it more in line with how the game looks on current generation consoles like the Xbox Series X, and we're left with some comparisons of medium and quality ray tracing here. You can see, honestly, that the bureau becomes more alive with both reflection options enabled, and the other settings too make quite a meaningful difference. Unfortunately, this game is just very demanding, with average 72 FPS and 96 respective of high and medium RT settings. Alright, let's bring this to a close and draw some conclusions, because honestly there's a lot of stuff to go through here, and there are certainly a lot of titles I could include. I'll probably be doing a follow-up to this in the not too distant future, since there are so many titles which are being released this year, which honestly didn't quite make the cut for this video. Now, the good news is a lot of titles easily can run at 120 frames a second, or getting pretty close to it. Resident Evil, Forza, and many others can easily hit 120 frames a second, and honestly, they look amazing at that particular frame rate and resolution. With other games such as Metro Exodus, if you start messing around with the settings a little bit and make concessions either in the ray tracing quality or you utilize a combination of DLSS and other means, you can get some very impressive visual quality. However, titles such as Cyberpunk, it's not possible to get anywhere close to 120 frames a second at a native 4K with ray tracing. The game is just so demanding. Honestly, I would advocate DLSS 3 if you own an RTX 40 card, simply because not only does it help, of course, with GPU-bound scenarios, but also CPU ones as well. To be very honest with you, I am a huge proponent of upscaling technologies, and I feel that FSR, Intel's XeSS, and of course Nvidia's DLSS are going to be critical going forward. It's also going to be very interesting to see how game engines evolve, especially as we start to see integration of Unreal Engine 5's Lumen become more and more prevalent in the gaming industry. Ultimately, the future is going to be very interesting going forward. Obviously, GPU performance is going through the absolute stratosphere, and with games consoles being relatively stagnant, we certainly don't expect, let's say, the PlayStation 6 to launch anytime soon. It's going to be very interesting to see how Nvidia, AMD, and even Intel push ray tracing in games. With all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed this video. This is kind of a new format for us. I'm still trying to tweak things and adjust things, so do please give me comments on, what you would like to see adjusted in the future. Also, you can reach me on Twitter. Again, this is not necessarily the final direction these type of videos are going to go in going forward, but I do like to create kind of fun analysis content. So we'll be doing a lot more of that. I've got a lot of ideas, not only for the 4090 and some other hardware, but just in general. So it's going to be kind of all cylinders firing now that the office and other things are starting to become more, well, more intact. With that said, thanks very much guys for watching the video. Stay safe and have an amazing day. Bye for now.